Jenn, you're the head teacher of Pitteuchar East Primary School in Fife. Tell me a little bit about how you interact with your children and about how you bring the ACEs approach into your everyday life, you and your team.
I think it's quite important to say that we've been looking at relationships and experiences that affect children since before we knew what to call them, since before the ACEs acronym hit our shores. And there is a huge understanding amongst my whole team that everything in a school is based upon relationships. And if those relationships are strong, when things go wrong, as they do in any school, it's easier to repair. They're very, very aware of the fact that no matter what role they have in the school, they are equally important. I'm out of school all afternoon. The school will run like clockwork. If two of my pupil support assistants are off, we really miss them. Their input is absolutely imperative to the running of the school, and they all understand it's about relationships. And it's no use stepping in when things are going wrong. Those relationships have to be there from the minute a child walks into our school.
So, has your work style ethic changed since discovering ACEs? I know you've been searching for a name for it perhaps, or put a label on it. But was it the ACEs term that brought it all together for you, and how's that affected your work practice?
It certainly did clarify things, particularly for a lot of our team. We made sure that everybody in the team, pupil support assistants, a janitor, was able to access the resilience film. It was shown in our cluster. I also spoke to most of our cluster around the work that we had been doing. And I think what it's done is actually brought a clarity of purpose to what we're doing. We're no longer a lone voice saying, look, these things affect children. There's now a science behind it which tells us early intervention is exceptionally effective. Some of our children are 3, so if we can get in at that level, help those children, for example, in the nursery, using the Solly Hull approach to co-regulate with the children. By the time they're reaching middle school, they'll self-regulate very effectively. And we're now knowing that we're not alone in this. There are countless other professions out there who are joining in that work and giving it credence, giving it clout.
We'll come on to that because I want to talk about relationships not only in the school but externally out with the school. Do you have any examples, any tangible results of the change of behaviour in staff and also in subsequently in the pupils by taking this approach?
It was systemic. We began years ago looking at the term challenging behaviour had always bothered me. In my mind, it was almost as bad as bad behaviour, misbehaviour, challenging behaviour. And we took an approach back then that all these behaviours that we were seeing that didn't conform necessarily were triggered and motivated by distress. Now, as soon as you say to a grown-up, now remember, we're talking about big people and little people, it's as simple as that. If a little person is distressed, your immediate response as a big person is to offer comfort. And it has taken a lot of work to describe those behaviours through the ACEs lens. This is distress we are seeing. This is not a child challenging the establishment or challenging routines. They are not able to cope. And having, my team and colleagues from health all beginning to understand this window of tolerance that people have, it's given us a shared language. We're very, in various professions, it can become a little bit like silos. We have education speak, health have their own terms that they use, police, housing, they all have their own specific terms. This has opened up a discussion through a shared language and indeed a shared purpose.
And in terms of relationships, it was interesting. We were talking off camera and we were talking about the relationships with little people, but the relationships with big people is as equally as important, particularly in the network. When you talk about working in silos, but you need to know people out with your silos in order to make a difference to those little people.
I've seen a massive improvement in that. The ACE's message is being picked up by all, by professionals right across the board. The example I used was, when we were off camera, is a network within Glenrothes. We have a plan for Fife, we have a plan for Glenrothes, and those are multi-agency meetings. And it's been very interesting, the gent who's organising it, when I said to him, look, we need to keep meeting. It's vital that we get these people in the same room talking about our, various roles. He immediately brought in housing. Now, housing was an organisation that I never had anything to do with before, really. Although I felt they could be useful, I didn't know who to speak to. And it's quite daunting as a professional, if you don't know another team, to pick up the phone, not really knowing where that inquiry or worry is going to go. And what we've seen build up very quickly between different departments and different professions is a high level of trust. And that's, in our school, we work on what we like to call institutional trust, so that anybody walking into our school, parent, child, visitor, will be treated with respect and compassion. And we pride ourselves on that. And, getting those relationships strengthened across the professions has been hugely helpful.
It's quite clear that there is a culture, a change of culture happening in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And, you were at the conference in last September. What did you take away from those 2 days?
Where do I start? What really struck me, I have to say, the one phrase that I couldn't get out of my head on the way home was John Carnachan, when he mentioned, when he's asked to speak about gangs, and he says, well, what gangs do you want me to speak about? Education gangs, social work gangs, or territorial gangs? And I thought, there is a culture that could be seen by people who are involved in systems, that we are, it's like a them and us. I was at a children's panel recently in a venue that I'd never been to before, and the room was set out like a living room, and the atmosphere was completely different to any children's panel I've ever experienced, because we were relaxed. There was no big table, and you need to remember that most children that I deal with, if they're going to a children's panel hearing, it's not through their actions. It's not them who have caused that panel to happen or to be called. And just the atmosphere in the room, it was like people get it, people understand, that showing that compassion, that understanding of a worry that somebody might feel coming into something which is run by systems and run by professional organisations that they don't understand or they maybe fear. It makes a huge difference to the young person and their families. They come in, it's taking that, are you okay? And not, this is a problem we need to fix. And if you take it from the, are you okay? This is what's going to happen. People are prepared for it, and they're more willing to work with you.
We know that Scotland previously, 10, 13, 14, 15 years ago, has led the way with regard to the violence reduction unit. You mentioned John.
Yeah.
We've spoken about Karen in previous vodcasts. We look up and down the country at what's happening. So there was a young lady murdered in Romford the same weekend, a young man murdered in Manchester. And we're getting reports of violence all over the UK. It seems that Theresa May is now looking at Scotland quite vocally about the work that's being done here. This is a really big question, Jen. But do you feel if schools, let's say south of the border, more of them were adopting, and maybe they are, the approach that you take in your school, do you think that in years to come we might start to see a reduction in violence across the country?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but what we are doing will certainly not harm it. What concerns me about lifting a model from one place to another is that they will lift part of it without looking at the foundation. I'll use the example of Whitfield in Dundee. That was based on a Scandinavian model, and we looked at that and thought, that's a great model, we can replicate that. But we missed out things like the concierge in every building, the public spaces, the public amenities. We took a cheaper, smaller, quicker option, and it didn't work. And I think if we're looking at projects that are going to have an impact, like reducing violence, we need to look at a far more holistic approach. I was on a panel with Paul Main, Chief Superintendent of Ayrshire Police, James Docherty from VRU, and another colleague from Palmont. And I said, I'll know if my approaches have worked, if my little people never come into contact with you guys in a negative way. But I think it definitely needs to be a grassroots approach, which is what we have in the ACES movement.
We have another conference on the way on the 11th of June, which is looking at adult trauma. Specifically, and the elements around that. Where do you think we're going now? I mean, there's certainly the movement is still moving in Scotland. There is a culture change. More and more people are talking about what's happening. What's your vision for the future, even in the short term?
What I've found in my approach now, I've been head teacher there for quite a number of years, is that, again, I'm going back to trust, is that the parents are trusting the professionals, not just me, but people that I'm bringing in, because that relationship is there. You know, there's not the fear that if a social worker comes in, your children will be taken into care. It's a far more proactive approach that's going on in Scotland at the moment, which I believe is having a massively positive effect.
Jenn Knussen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.